The infrastructure providers don't filter the route advertisements, which tell people how to get from one place on the internet to the other. They also, and more importantly, don't filter the packets to verify that they are from where they say they were from. And so it's very easy, basically cheap or marginally free, for people to send traffic from cheap servers, virtual servers, or to compromise machines and send them from all over the internet and take a site down. There are three motivations for the hackers that are actually launching these attacks. The first third of them are they just don't like somebody. The second is actually extortion. So similar to the kind of ransomware, but for availability. So people attack both kinds of gaming companies, the gambling companies as well as the online gaming companies, because they both make a tremendous amount of revenue from their online business. And they'll extort them for $100, $1,000, $10,000, and sometimes people will actually pay. The third kind of attack is launched by people that are actually trying to pick your pocket, right? So mainly DDoS is I shove your head in a toilet. It's an availability attack. You can't breathe, you can't get to the internet. But while those happen, there are companies that have seen targeted attacks that are going on trying to swamp all the monitoring and instrumentation. A lot of the time that people come under attack, there really is no early notice. Someone will have gone to the website, not liked it, it'll be for whatever motivation, and then they'll just send the attack. But about half the time, if you look carefully beforehand, you can see tremors, like test traffic that is mapping you out. This happened to us on our corporate website. They'll do one thing, then another, then ramp the traffic, and then typically go away. You can typically look in China time zone or Eastern European time zone. It really does pretty well correlate, and the key is have good monitoring. Be able to look at things that are not just one packet, but a pattern, and have people be on the lookout for that. Now, if you detect that you're being probed, the question is what to do about it. The easiest way to tell whether you actually have an attack or a misconfiguration or just a normal traffic surge is to actually take a look at the metadata streaming off of your infrastructure, take it from your routers and switches, and just peer into it. It's like double click on the SNMP overall view, and frequently you'll see that what looks like an attack is someone pounding your API. It's a misconfigured load balancer, or sometimes it'll be an attack, and then there's things you can do about it. The main thing that people should think about in terms of protecting availability, if they're worried about DDoS, is establishing monitoring and establishing a relationship with someone that can protect them if they come under attack.
The one thing I really want to point out is that DNS is this underlying technology, but I really want them to realize that they should be paying attention to the traffic and looking for the patterns in the traffic, and that there's a lot of really useful security intelligence in that traffic. In a DNS packet, when the client makes a request, there's a transaction ID that allows the client, when it gets a response, to say, I sent this request and this is the response that I got for that request. But the ID is only 16 bits long, so there's a manageable number of different variations of that ID. So if an attacker floods the client with responses trying to guess that ID, then the client might match a fake response back up, and rather if it arrives before the real response arrives, then they can take in the wrong answer about where the DNS request is supposed to go. So if they were looking up a domain name of a bank, they might get a fake IP that takes them to a fake site. DNS spoofing is when a different DNS server answers a DNS request that was intended to go to some other DNS server. And a cache poisoning is when the result for a domain name lookup, there's a different result other than the correct result stored. So you're looking up the name of a bank and you've stored an IP address of a different site, not the real bank site. If a DNS server can spoof being the correct DNS spoofer, they can send the wrong result and then that result gets cached. DNS is this underlying policy that underlies everything that works on the internet and in our internal networks. And so it's this, and it's also not very monitored. So it's this great way for attackers to be able to send data out to the internet without being detected. So data exfiltration is when data is leaving your computer and being taken away without you knowing about it. You can create a DNS request that actually has data encoded in the subdomain part of the domain, and then DNS records will get forwarded to the authoritative server for that domain name. So if the attacker owns the domain name evildomain.com and they own the authoritative server, they can send, or the malware can send DNS requests that have an encoded part and then the domain name, and all of that encoded information will be sent as a request to the attacker's authoritative domain server, and then they can unencode the data. So that's one type of, that's where it's used for exfiltration. It can be also used for tunneling to get past security controls. A reflective DNS amplification attack is when the attacker sets up a very large DNS record, say the text record that's very large, and they send a DNS request and they set the source IP to somebody else's service. And so they send a very small packet requesting a domain name, but the response is very large. And because they've set the source IP to somebody else's IP address, the very large packet gets sent to a web service or some other service that's the target of the attack. And then using a whole lot of bots or compromised routers in people's homes, they can send hundreds or thousands of these very large packets to a target and flood their network with traffic.
In the first 30 years of Ethernet, the general process was, let's go faster, 10 times faster, make it and they will come. In just the last 5-ish years, we've seen that there's so many different applications that want to adopt Ethernet that only going
So backing up when you're dealing with as a defensive maneuver for ransomware is always a very good move when you're talking about end user systems and even server systems. But backups themselves are not always the answer. You have to be careful that during the course of doing backups, you may actually back up the ransomware tools or the triggering activity, whether it was an email or something of that nature, at the same time. Before you do a restore a backup, you need to look at the integrity of the backup and appreciate that, are you actually going to reinfect yourself by the nature of using the backup? So if the adversary was successful once, what's going to make them not capable of doing that again? So often what I suggest in many environments, especially for end user scenarios where ransomware is a potential issue, is work on backing up data files and not system files whenever possible, and then image the device. Don't even try and cleanse the endpoint. Image the endpoint and then restore only the data files. When doing so, take clear and understanding of what could have happened, especially in the email. Because a lot of ransom attacks come out of phishing attacks where they're attachments to emails. So make sure we look through and find that source. Also recognize that good adversaries will actually sit dormant in backups for more than 90 days. I call this the 91-day effect, the 91-day attack. Because the principle being in many IT situations is that 90 days is a typical backup rotation. So if the adversary is monitoring and sees that their code still exists in your systems on the 91st day, they have a fairly reasonable point of view that this is propagated to all of your backups. Now when they go and exercise their attack, they can look at this and saying the backup restoration process may not be an effective control about them getting access again. Big part of ransomware scenario is if you decide to make payment as one of your measures, if you decide to take that action, the assumption is I'm done. The assumption is once I pay, I'll get the key, I'll be able to decrypt, I'll be able to move on from this. The question has to be at the time, well, how'd they get in the first place? So you have to worry about re-victimization, because the choice to pay is a very emotional and very important decision that has many ramifications. So getting that key back is one important stage, but you have to appreciate how they got there in the first place and make sure you have appropriate controls, defenses, and detection capabilities to defend against that in the future. Otherwise, it could be a Groundhog Day effect. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. As soon as you pay, they come back and they ask again and again, because they know that you're willing to pay at that point. And at the point you're willing to pay, the sensitivity of the adversary community increases dramatically, and they can sell that to other adversaries to say, I was able to use this tool set against this group in this way, and you can pay me for the instructions on how to do so. So I've gotten monetized from being the payment, as well as selling it to other adversaries saying, why don't you use them, because they will probably pay.